Jerry Koch-Gonzalez is with us tonight from Sociocracy for All, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. So Jerry, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay, so yes, Jerry Koch-Gonzalez, not only with Sociocracy for All as a co-founder with Ted Rao, but I live in the Pioneer Valley Cohousing community in Amherst, Massachusetts. I'm a founding resident, so we've been here 24 years. And I facilitated a lot of meetings here. First 18 years or so with the process of consensus, and the last 6 years or so with the process of sociocracy or consent decision making. So this was kind of built like a fireside chat, which meant it's really kind of minimal presentation, and then really kind of opening it up to questions, comments. You know, let's talk about this. And so I'm just going to sort of frame out some things and then let everybody talk. And we'll evaluate whether this kind of way of doing things works or whether you want more in-depth presentations or whatever. That's part of the experiment of doing these. Yes, facilitating while listening. All right, so first of all, just quickly, some of my thoughts on role of facilitator. Obviously, planning the agenda, or at least making sure that you have a plan for how you will facilitate the agenda that somebody else planned. Never facilitate a meeting that you don't understand, because then you will not be able to facilitate while listening to what's going on for people. And facilitate according to whatever the agreed upon process. Different groups have more or less clarity about their meeting process. You know, I facilitate in the process of consent decision making sociocracy, so I'm very clear on what I'm doing. Groups that use consensus have a variety of being a lot of clarity to being kind of mushy about what their process is. Anytime you have lack of clarity about process, more emotions, feelings, and stuff can rise up, you know, debating about how we're going to do what we do. And in that part also, clarity about what's your role in the group as a facilitator. What power do you have? I, as facilitator, will sometimes speak out of turn in order to facilitate the group, you know, to make sure that people are heard, etc., and also to check in with the group about any changes in the plan of the meeting that we're having. Clarity about member hat and facilitator hat. You know, I like that quote, you can't be neutral on a moving train. I don't believe there's any such thing as a neutral facilitator. There are just facilitators who are more or less skilled at being able to hold both their own opinions and hold the well-being and the moving forward of the group at the same time. So, for example, simply put, when we do a round and we hear from everybody in a group, if I'm facilitating, I'll put myself somewhere in the middle of the round. So I start with the instructions, it goes around, I'm in the middle somewhere, and it ends back with me, and I'm back in facilitator role. So that kind of clarity is important so that you don't ascribe more power to yourself, in a sense, as facilitator, because you start or end things. And willingness to ask for help. That ideally everybody in a group is responsible for the well-functioning of the group. It's not just simply the facilitator's burden. This belongs to everyone. And it's important, in a sense, to asking for help, perhaps from an assistant facilitator or from the whole group, to say to the group, I don't really know what to do right now, so let's do a round on how should we proceed, and give the authority, the power, the responsibility back to the whole. What are we facilitating? We're facilitating the spirit and well-being of the group. We're facilitating inclusiveness, that every voice matters. How are we going to be able to hear everyone who is in the room? We want to facilitate a certain order to the process. We want to have focus, making sure that people are staying on topic and staying in the process of the moment. The process meaning wherever we are in the agenda, whether it's clarifying questions about a proposal or we're in a consent round about a decision. Where are we in that process? And we're facilitating a shared understanding among those present that leads to action, that leads to results. I often think, this is one of the frames that we use in Sociocracy for All, that there's kind of three elements in a meeting. There may be reports, things that we want to understand. So we facilitate to make sure that everybody understands. There are elements where we are exploring a topic. So we want to make sure we understand the topic, that we know what the context is that we're trying to discuss, and then we create a space in which we explore without trying to make decisions. And then the third potential item or context of an agenda item is that we're seeking decision making. So we want to make sure we understand what the proposal is. We explore our reactions to the proposal and we make a decision. And so the facilitator is supporting that process. Facilitation is really different in large groups and small groups. In co-housing communities, many co-housing communities have large whole community meetings. From my point of view, they're not particularly well suited for making decisions. So I would like to drive as much decision making to smaller groups as possible. The usefulness of large groups is gathering feedback. We're not just trying to, and how do we do that? It's not simply by calling on people, in turn. I see a hand here, here, and here. I see a hand here, here, and here. What that supports is often debate within a large group. And I want people to be able to hear each other. So doing things like turn and talk. You present something and then you say, okay, turn to your neighbor and reflect upon what you heard. You've got 2 minutes, something like that. Complex issues or issues that we do need to move a large group towards decision making, break them up into small groups and say, okay, you've got 15 minutes, work on this and see what you come up with. And a point or a reporter or a facilitator for each of those small groups so that you have some order and clarity and support everyone's participation. There are multiple other ways to bring out information in groups and to be able to really listen to each other in a deeper way than simply popcorn talking in large groups. A couple of those are spectrums, where you line up, the obvious one is, line up according to age. Okay, so everybody lines up according to age and you can ask, okay, speak about your experience of being of this age in this community. You can have everybody line up on, what do you think about whether people should pay if they're not going to do community work? And you can have people line up where they fit on that spectrum and then hear, why did you stand in the particular place that you stood? So a variety of ways of gathering information. Fishbowls, getting a small group in the middle to talk about a topic. We recently did this in our community with the membership circle. The membership team got in the middle and they talked about the issues of short-term rentals like Airbnb. How is our community affected by people doing Airbnb rentals in our community? So they started off the conversation and then we had an open seat and people could come into the open seat and people could actually tap somebody out and, and join. So it was a focused conversation that was witnessed by a larger group, allowing more depth, a bit more continuity, again, than popcorn in a large group. And in any case, if you're working with large groups, your responsibility or the aim for me as a facilitator is to summarize, to synthesize, to remind participants of where we are in the process of the meeting and restating the aim of any section of the meeting that we're in. Always thinking about who is getting heard. Rounds support equivalence. Everyone's voice matters. When you do popcorn in large groups, that tends to privilege the few who have personal power, often based on privilege. So I'm concerned about that. Large groups are anonymous. Smaller groups support more care and connection. So here's the last, or the next to last slide. This is really what I wanted to say in this session. The aim as a facilitator is to make sure that speakers express themselves clearly and that the listeners are hearing what the speakers want to say. So there's several things that I do as a facilitator. If I'm concerned that what was said was not understood, then I might restate. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. I heard you say this, blah, blah, blah. Is that right? So just clarity. Okay. Another might be that what was said was too cryptic, or it had a lot of emotion in it, and so I couldn't really understand what was behind it. So I might ask, I'd like to understand better what you're saying. Could you tell me more about this? So I'm seeking, or could you tell me what's really important to you here? Sometimes the opposite of cryptic is they said so much we can't hold on to the nugget. Another frame is that the essence of what was said may not be clear. Again, they spoke too many words or too much emotion, and it's not clear what's going on. So summarize and reflect. I am hearing that what is important to you is this. Did I get that right? And again, if I got it, they can then correct, and I can always say, is there more? So that we're driving for the deeper layers of people being able to express themselves. So that's what's important to me is when I think of facilitating while listening. It's not just the mechanics, it's being able to slow down and pay attention to the individuals in the group because they matter and what their voice, what they're trying to express matters. And because I want to make sure that everyone else who is listening is hearing what the speaker is trying to say. That's it. Sociocracy for All. We've written a book called Many Voices, One Song, which you can look at. We've got lots of materials on the website, sociocracyforall.org, including numbers of things about facilitation and decision-making in groups. And so, did I hear you? Did you hear me? I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for comments. Stop share. Raise a question for us.
And I'm going to suggest if it works to just have one unmute, that's fine. But if it looks like too many are trying to talk at once, you can use the chat just to say, I have a question, and then I'll call on people in order from there.
Okay, good. Karen will do the calling, so I don't have to pay attention to that level. So first person, unmute yourself if you want. And quite a few of you are unmuted anyway.
Well, I have a question. This is Lori. Is that okay?
That's great. And Lori, what community are you from?
Hello?
Lori, we hear you.
I'm from Muir Commons in Davis, California, the first one to build from the ground and move in 1991. So we have, and I was one of the original members. At any rate, and it's going great. I love co-housing. I do have one comment and one question. To me, I do facilitate pretty regularly. We actually have a hat we put on when we're becoming a regular member versus a facilitator, but I still find that awkward. And we try not to facilitate when it's an issue we care strongly about because that makes it more difficult. But I'd like a few more comments about keeping that clear, switching back and forth. And then my second question is, I tend to like things that move along, go in order. And I don't think I'm as good as I could be about, being more easygoing about letting the flow happen. So, however, we get a lot done. So there are pluses and minuses, but those are my two questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the first question is about clarity of your role as facilitator versus clarity of your role as member. I think any system can work as long as you make it clear. Whether you actually have a physical hat that you put on and take off, or you put yourself in the middle of a round, or you simply are very clear as you speak. You say, okay, with my facilitator hat on, here's, I'm going to say something about process, or I'm going to summarize. And with my member hat on, I'm going to speak as a member. I think clarity is the most important element here. And anytime if you find yourself too involved personally, that you really want to put most of your attention to yourself as a participant, that's the time to ask for help and to say, hey, I want to turn over facilitation to somebody else so that I can really more fully embody being a participant here. And obviously, in that case, it helps that you already have some people in mind or people that you would expect to pass that on to, so you don't throw kind of a complete surprise into a group. The other thing about moving things along, the best thing I can say about that is, again, it's all about clarity. It's about having a really clear agenda with really clear purposes for each item in the agenda, and a really clear process that everybody's expecting to go through. Again, because I'm coming from the point of view of the sociocratic approach, we use a very clear process. That's really helpful to have a clear process that everybody knows. So it's, again, not just a facilitator's art that's involved, but everybody supporting the expected process. You can put a big chart on the wall, with the meeting agenda, with an arrow that can move down item to item. And that's one way to help people. You can have a decision-making process with the multiple steps and move the arrow down each step so that people are really clear where we are and what are we going to do in this particular spot. So the better the participants know what to expect, the more they will be able to move things along and support you as facilitator. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so we have a question from Judy Slater. Can you clarify the fishbowl process?
Fishbowl. So fishbowls get used, actually you can use in small groups as well, because you could just have 2 people. But typically we use fishbowls in a large, in the large community meeting. Say you have 40 people in the room. And either an intact group, like one of your committees, sits in the middle, or it could be a group that's made up of some of the strong, some of the opinionated people, or a mixture of people around a particular topic. Let's say we want to explore the outdoor cat policy for our community to be. That's the bloodiest issue I've ever known in community. Nothing is harder than outdoor cats. So I might put in, Laura, who's the cat lover, in there. I might put in Henry, who's the bird lover, who's concerned about the cats killing the birds, into that middle group. They're sitting in a circle of chairs in the middle of the hole. I might put some other people who maybe have also perhaps some strong opinions, and some people who are kind of in the middle or could hold the sort of the center of the conversation. And then let them start exploring that, the issue. I might give them more detailed instructions about how to hold that conversation. But that's essentially the essence of a fishbowl, is get some people in the middle who will discuss among themselves, and while the outside group listen. And then there's variations of what you can do with that, in terms of having 1 open seat or 2 open seats, or tapping people in and out of the middle so that other people can step in from time to time and share what's coming up for them. After a fishbowl, I would almost always want to do like a turn and talk, so that everybody who's been listening has a chance to reflect on what they've heard, hear themselves speak, listen to somebody else, before we then open up in whatever way we're going to open up for whole group reflections. Check.
Okay, so then we have Sandra. How do you suggest attracting new people?
Gee, that's not quite on topic of facilitation. Attracting new people. The best thing I know about attracting new people is each one find one. Who are your friends and your relatives or people who travel in your circles that you could invite? Search out who are like-minded groups or organizations. A lot of the communities that I know recently are getting a huge influx of members from the Unitarian community, Unitarian meeting houses. because there's such like-mindedness among Unitarians that it becomes a really good source for new members. There may be other kinds of organizations like that. Call a meetup in your town and see who shows up. Our community got started by a newspaper ad. Check.
Okay. John Orsolak, you said you had a comment for Lori. Can you unmute yourself and share that?
Sure. One thing we do, I'm with Green Country Co-Housing in Tulsa, where we have land and we're moving forward. When we have our general meetings, our agendas, our team point persons, when they give their reports, they specify approximately how much time they're going to need to cover their report or any particular issues they're going to work on. And then our timekeeper keeps track of that. And then we can have some flexibility. If we need more time, we can lengthen the time for that particular point person before we move forward to the next one. And that seems to be working well for us.
Can I comment? This is Lori again. Can I comment?
Go ahead.
Thank you, John. We do that too. We have figure out how much time we think we're going to need. I guess I get annoyed, and maybe this is my weakness, by there's someone who makes jokes that kind of take us off topic, and someone who just people who go off topic a little bit, and it's I find it annoying, but I think I need to work on finding it less annoying and just working to bring people back or let it go.
Yeah, that is facilitator's role, is to say to people, I mean, one of the key elements in working together is feedback. We need to be telling each other the impact we have on each other. And some of that has to do with people's participation in meetings. That might mean you talk to some people outside the meeting and say, hey, I've noticed that over a number of meetings, you do this behavior and it's impacting on me, and have that conversation. We need to have the courage to be honest with each other. If I'm facilitating in a meeting and someone's off topic, I'll just say, John or Joe or whoever it is, this is what we're talking about right now. Could you bring your comments back to being relevant to this? And if you have, and if they're mentioning something that's related but not quite on topic, I can say, thank you, that seems like an important point. We can put it in our parking lot for another discussion, or put it over here so that it is honored, respected, but we're going to go back to what we're talking about front and center here. So some way to do that kind of process. And if we don't do that, then we're creating a culture that allows people to speak at will without consciousness of the impact on each other. Check.
Okay, we have Lee is asking, if you use Sociocracy in your community, do you feel you get enough time to connect with community members in the general circle as with consensus? Or is there an amount of connection lost in the switch to Sociocracy?
The amount of connection is actually increased because, and I want to just say, there's a difference too to pay attention to between communities that are in development and communities that are already, are mature. My community is 24 years old. So we're in a very different state than those of you who are trying to get, get the shovel in the ground. We, as much as possible, what I encourage is decision-making in the smaller groups where people can actually hear each other. And when you disperse power into the smaller groups, which you need to have trust in order to be able to do that, then you create space in the whole community meetings for more community building. In the whole community, now you can do three things: gather feedback on issues that the small groups are working on. Those small groups can ask for feedback, get the feedback without the tension of having to make a decision in a large group. Secondly, you can do education work in the large group. You can do education work about sociocracy or about consensus or whatever your forms of governance are. You can do education about nonviolent communication or other forms of communication skill building. You can do education about the soils of the land that we're going to be living on, whatever education you want. And the third, and perhaps most important, is you have time for community building, which means you can go into small groups and say, let's tell our life stories in small groups. Let's tell our stories from childhood. Let's tell our stories from our gender, experience. Many different ways of having people share their lives, their stories, what issues are serious for them right now that you can do in that time, which in my experience in the consensus process, where so much is decided in the whole group and the process is slow and challenged, is that you spend your time debating each other rather than really listening to each other's stories, which is kind of the, the connective glue of why you have come together in community in the first place.
Okay. We have Neil asking about the best practices to call out power and privilege.
Best practices to call out power and privilege. So the first thing I think of, and I'm sorry, I don't want to apologize. I just want to acknowledge that I am an advocate of sociocracy, and everybody who's interested in sociocracy, wants to know about it, put your email address in the chat and we'll get more information to you. So one of the reasons I like sociocracy is just a primacy of doing rounds. If you do a round, and you can't do a round in 40 people very often because it takes too much time, but if you're in a smaller groups, you can do rounds. And in the rounds, every single person's voice matters. And you wind up having more care for each other. So we can do a lot of consciousness raising, which I think is fabulous, about how men act in meetings, how white people act in meetings, etc. But you also need the practice of equivalence that something like a round would give you. And I guess to go back and say something about consciousness raising, I was a participant in a training once, and we were making a decision by consensus. This was many years ago. There was 20 of us in the room, 10 men and 10 women. And the facilitator said, okay, you got 5 minutes left to reach consensus on what the order of these objects you would bring to the moon, what's most important. At the end of the time, we had reached consensus, terrific. And then the facilitator said to us, in those last 5 minutes, only men spoke. So that was a real, eye-opening bell for me and for all of us in the room. It's like, wow, look what just happened. Privilege spoke. So doing exercises or doing educational work to build that ground of consciousness in the group, I think is really important. Race, class, gender, all those things. And to go back to what I said before, and then you have to do a practice that supports equivalence. And calling on people, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in large meetings, to me is not a practice that tends to support equivalence. Check.
Okay. Barb, who had to leave us, but perhaps will listen to the recording, asked about attracting new facilitators.
Attracting new facilitators. Well, the main thing I would think of attracting new facilitators would most likely be the issue of confidence. Otherwise, they would already have stepped up. There's desire, and there's a desire question: do they want to do this? And there's a confidence question: do I feel capable? So if you can identify anybody who's interested, then how can you support them to gain more confidence? So a number of things you can do. One, they can shadow you as facilitator. They can be with you as you plan the agenda or review the agenda, and they can debrief with you after the meeting's over and review kind of how you made what decisions, what were those key moments in the meetings, and why did you do this versus that at that moment, so that they're learning from you how you think, about facilitation. They can start taking bits and pieces of a meeting. They can take a 15-minute chunk or one item, and you can be there to support them. In case they get stuck, they can say, I don't know what to do, and then you can step in and support them. Leading pieces that you support them in. And then there's endless amounts of material online, webinars, videos, books, stuff to read, stuff to witness, lots of material out there, including, all the stuff that we have on our website. Check.
Okay. Beth Livingston asked, what kinds of actual decisions does your community make in the plenary circle rather than in more specific circles?
Pretty much the decisions that we make in the plenary have to do with we make a decision in the plenary once a year on the annual budget. However, that the elements of that budget are proposed by the circles, by the committees. So every circle, which is the same word for committee, has its own budget that they've worked on in the past year. And so they're basically revising their last year's budget to think about this coming year. And so the proposed budget is based upon all the different circles, committees, putting together their proposed budgets that they are responsible for. And again, given that we're 24 years old, standard budget is very easy to approve. It's the new items that generate more discussion. You know, if we want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 on something new that's not standard, that will take more effort. Other items that we might do in plenary is if we were to change our governance, for example, from sociocracy back to consensus or to something else, that would be a decision in the plenary. If we wanted to buy another piece of land or build another house. So basically major issues. Everything else we have dispersed into the smaller groups. We do once a year elect our board of directors, but they are essentially a group in name only. They kind of rubber stamp the decisions that are made in the whole community meetings or what we call the general circle, the coordinating group, or the sub-circle. Check.
And she's asking a follow-up question about how that might differ from a development stage with half the households in.
Yeah, development stage is pretty challenging because you're going absolutely full out on two spheres. One is trying to get everything done so you can start building, which means you're looking for the site, you're getting the money together, you're contracting with contractors and architects and so on, and building town permits. A lot of decisions that need to be made very quickly. But at the same time, you're trying to build your sense of community with the new people that are coming in. And you don't want to lose sight of the sense of community of, the folks who are going to want to live together. So you want to work on both of those processes at the same time. So each of them has, in my best practice, is each of them has a coordinating group for the development side of things and for the community building side of things. And then at least two people from each of those connects together to do the coordination between those two elements. Now that depends upon the groups being willing to have, again, it's kind of a matter of trust. If you believe that everybody has to be involved in everything, that can be a really challenging process. And what often happens with that, when everybody's supposed to be involved with everything, is that some people will get run over in the process and somehow the decisions will get made. So becoming more intentional about dividing the tasks and entrusting people that you select because of their qualities intentionally rather than people who self-volunteer, to me, that's kind of best process. More to say about that because that's a complicated subject. We should actually have a group meeting, I think, on just that kind of issue, the development, the development phase of co-housing. So I would recommend that, Karen, as a future topic for these series. Check.
Okay, so Neil is asking, and I think this is probably our last question for tonight. When the energy gets low, what are some fun activities that you like and find effective, which get attendees to feel refreshed and present again?
Well, anything that gets people out of their seats, for one. One of the things I like doing, again, I'm assuming if people need refreshing, it means that you're working in a large group. Because in small groups, you generally don't need refreshing because you're so focused on each other and your work that if it's functional, it's fun. But in a large group, when only a few people can talk at a time, it can get kind of stale, can get a little boring as you listen to people. So things I like to do is the most fun thing is to do is pair sharing, like concentric circles. Get everybody up, find a partner, give them a topic. You know, what led you to co-housing, or, you know, any of the kind of community building kinds of questions. And you meet with one partner, 2 minutes each way, new partner. Whether you do that in rotating pairs where the group keeps circling, or just mill around, or just do fun things. There are games such as what's called Great Wind Blows, where you have everybody stand in a circle and somebody stands in the middle and says, a great wind blows for anybody who went swimming in the pond this month. And then everybody for whom that's true moves to a new spot. And somebody's left in the middle and they ask a new question. So playing, you know, for me, one of the reasons for being in community is to have more opportunities to play together. So finding ways to bring play into the group, doing yoga exercises, you know, all together, something very simple. Things like that, that get your body moving and not just a talking heads kind of context. Check.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that got all the questions from the chat. If I missed anyone, go ahead and unmute and speak up. But I think I got them all.
I have one more.
Okay. Well,
we have time.
We'd have time for.
I can even. Okay, you suggested a chance at a general meeting to break up into small groups, have deeper discussion. Our general meetings are full of business. When do you do this? They're full of business, resolving proposals from the committees.
Yeah, and
do you understand?
Yeah, and that's my question back to you is why? Why not give more power to the committees to make decisions? Why are your meetings so full of business that you don't have time to connect with each other?
Well, they make decisions, but if it's a big thing, it comes back to the general meeting.
Yeah.
And there seem to be enough of those that we're also revising all our proposals and yeah, but you're saying maybe take a meeting every few meetings and have it be more personal.
Yes, at least that's one strategy you can take.
Okay, can we get your email to do follow-up questions?
Yeah, Jerry with a J, Jerry at sociocracyforall.org.
Thank you.
Jerry at sociocracyforall.org. If you put your emails in the chat, we'll get to see all those. And if you have other questions, you can put those in the chat, and you know we can answer those after this session's over as well.
Wonderful.
And we do travel to communities and do facilitations or trainings, etc., on all these, you know, organizing our communities, decision making, organizational structure, all that kind of stuff. So do be in touch, and we'll see some of you in Portland in 2019.
If we could,
for the national conference.
Can you hear us here in this group?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we did send a message privately to you, and we wondered if you could address it.
Privately to Jerry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I didn't see it.
I don't have attention to see. You have to take a look. It's hard to see. It's hard to be present with the group and pay attention to private messages.
Sure.
So.
Well, next time we'll make sure we do it in the group.
So, but if you want to say it out loud,
we can do that too.
That would be easier. Just say it out loud now.
So this is Fort Collins, Colorado, and my question is, how do you bring new members into the learning the process? How do you educate as you work?
How do we educate as we work? Multiple strategies for that. One of the ones we like the most is teach as you go. So every time you have a meeting and you've got new people, you are working through your agenda and saying, okay, we're going to do an opening round, and we do opening rounds in order to welcome people, make sure that people are present with each other with whatever might be going on in their lives. Again, that's a small group. I'm talking a small group context where people will say, opening rounds, you know, what's affected them from the outside, or maybe if they have tensions from the inside about what's on the agenda. So we invite and we say, so that's what we're doing in the opening round. So giving that little bit of instruction about each piece of the agenda before you just dive into it. So you're doing a little tiny bit of education at every single moment. And that's a good reminder for everybody all the time about where we are, what we're doing. Other things you can do is, you know, orientations. Definitely orientations for new people about your decision-making process is absolutely critical, so that they know what the process is like, and also orientation about the organizational structure of who's doing what and how do you get to join different groups. Whatever you can do about orientation process, I think, is critical. And again, you can decide that you want people to watch this or that video. You know, again, all these resources that are available to you, you can ask your new members to do some reading, have discussion groups. We in Sociocracy have a 6-session study guide for people who want to learn Sociocracy. We have training programs. Other trainers in Consensus also, you know, do things. So all those, there's lots of resources available. Use them. Check.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, for all of the fabulous information. I'm going to close us with a few notes from the Cohousing Association and make sure we're finished on time. Really appreciate everybody being here. I counted 66 folks connected, and some of those were roomfuls of people, which is super exciting. So I'm thinking we had 70 or more of us together today. So thank you all for being here. Several people asked about, would the recording be available? The answer is, I hope so. This is part of what we are trying out. So we're learning the tech as we go here, and I am optimistic that we'll have it on the cohousing.org website within a week or so. But I'm not absolutely promising that, because we may be tech challenged.
No, we'll have the recording. We'll probably need to edit out the breakout, since that was kind of chaotic in the main room, but we'll have it.
Okay, so we'll get that out. And then I want to mention that the Cohousing Association is a nonprofit organization, and this isn't a high expense program, but it does involve some staff hours. And if you are willing to make donations to support this program and the rest of the work of the Cohousing Association, we certainly appreciate that. And I put the link for that in the chat, so you should be able to find it. We're also rolling out this week a Facebook group, which is an opportunity to ask exactly these kinds of questions of each other, and what do you do in your community and things like that. So I put the link to that in the chat as well. So feel free to join that. We'd love to see you there. And I think, oh, and then the last thing is to say that the next web chat is Thursday of next week, the 18th at 9 p.m. There has been a change in program for that. Laird had to switch because of his schedule, and so he and I swapped places. And I will be the presenter for the web chat next week, and then Laird will do the following one. So that's a change in the schedule from what we had published before. And I think that's everything. We would love to get your feedback. If you want to put comments in the chat of things that we could do better or that would make this program better. This obviously is the first one, and we are learning as we go. So feedback, very welcome. And I think that's everything. Jerry, do you have any?
Just, you know, when we do sessions like this, we often end the formal part, but I'm happy to stay for a little bit if anybody wants to keep chatting. So let's end the formal part, let everybody go who needs to go. But if anybody wants to hang out for a little bit, I'm happy to hang out and find out who else is here and what you want to say.
I do see a couple of questions about the topic for next week. So yes, we are swapping topics as well. So I will keep the topic I was planning on, which has to do with getting connected. And Laird will keep the topic he was planning, which is working productively with emotions. So next week will be getting connected, particularly for newer communities, but also reconnected or more connected for existing communities as well next week. All right, so I think that's it for the formal program. Thanks you all for being here.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
hello and goodbye to any of those people who know me, but I can't keep track of all these different little boxes with you there. But
Question, can you hear me?
I can speak up a little bit.
Okay. A couple of, I think, related things. You talked a little bit about the participant hat versus facilitator hat that the facilitator has to be clear on. I'm wondering, what if the group is feeling like those roles are getting muddy? How do we, what's a good way to provide feedback to the facilitator that more clarity is needed there?
A good way for the group to provide feedback to the facilitator about the distinction the facilitator is holding between themselves as participant and themselves as facilitator. Did I get that right?
Yes.
You know, I want to step back a little bit on this question and go, the culture of the group is really important. So when I hear that question, part of what I hear is like, oh, it seems to be challenging to give feedback. So what's the context in your group that has supported people giving feedback from day one, or in another group where they just don't give each other feedback ever because to give feedback is so scary or you know, like uncomfortable. So our co-housing groups have a wide range in our culture about that. The more you practice doing feedback, the more natural it seems to become and easier. So that's, you know, that's kind of a high level answer to your question. For me, several things. So every meeting ends, for me, every meeting would end with feedback. What went well? What didn't go so well could be improved. And so I would hope that people could speak up and say, hey, you know, there was some times in the meeting where I found it challenging because I couldn't tell where you as facilitator were facilitating or being a participant. So I would appreciate sort of more clarity about that, you know, in future meetings. So that's one way to do it. If that seems too difficult or there's too much emotion, you might approach the facilitator one-on-one and say, you know, I had some reaction to some of the stuff that happened in the meeting. Would you be willing to hear me out on that? And if that's a, you know, mutual agreement that they're willing to do that, then you can share that information. And then here's what went on for me. How do you receive my feedback? Making sure that clarity of message sent was message received. There may be some feelings about that. You want to pay attention to those and respect those because you don't want to beat up on facilitators. You want to encourage them and support them to be the best that they can be.
That's helpful. You in fact kind of read my mind on the second question I was going to ask was debriefing at the end of the meeting, and it sounds like you think that's a smart thing to do at each meeting. Yeah, you know, it's again one of those sociocratic principles is evaluation. We evaluate any meeting. We have a role improvement process for anybody who's a facilitator or a leader of a group, that every once in a while there's a process of sharing with them what's going on well with your performance in that role, what could be improved. Always positive. You know, it's not about bashing people. It's about supporting people to be better at what they're doing. Any work process, you know, if you're in a kitchen in a common house and you're feeding 50 people, every once in a while, it'd be good to take a look at how are we doing our dishwashing system? You know, can we give some feedback to that process that we might improve our system? When we started doing dishwashing in our community and we had, you know, 60 people at our meals, it took 4 people, I think, 2.5 hours to clean up. 20-something years later, it takes 3 people about an hour and 15 minutes to clean up. So they've learned to become more effective and efficient over time. So how can we support that learning process, whether it's about dishwashing or about how we onboard new people? You know, we just need to look at how can we improve our systems and do that intentionally. One of the things that we do in our community is
every 2 years, we invite all the circles, all of our committees to review the policies that they have, that they are responsible for, and the policies that they're responsible for that are really affecting the whole community. So every 2 years, they could spend 5 minutes looking at their policies and say, hey, still look great. Or they could say, we better look at this one. And as a matter of fact, this one's kind of so complex or emotional that we better get some feedback. There's clearly this policy is not working so well. So let's gather feedback appropriate to the level of the decision so that then our group can go ahead and make an informed revision of that policy. So all policies have a look-see every 2 years. That's a way so that they don't get stale. So check. This is more free will popcorn. I don't hold Karen to be responsible for calling on people. So unmute yourself if you want to say something or just start speaking. And do let us know where you're coming from. So this is, that wasn't Vicky speaking, but it says Vicky on the box.
Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm wondering, is there any resources that we can read up on about sociocracy?
Tons. Sociocracyforall.org.
Okay.
That's our website. If you look at the resources, link to the resource in the, what do you call it? The navigation panel, look for resources. You'll see tons of things. This is a book that we just published in June. It's a how-to manual. It's really detailed. I think it's great, of course, because I co-wrote it with Ted.
I think it's great too, and I didn't co-write it. I think, honestly, of everything there is in process, I think that what Sociocracy for All is doing is probably the most comprehensive set of resources out there.
What's the name of the book again?
Many Voices, One Song.
Okay.
You can buy single copies on Amazon. You can buy bulk orders from us. We have a YouTube channel. You can go on YouTube and type Sociocracy and you'll get a bunch of stuff. Some of it from us, some of it from other people.
Okay.
So go to YouTube, go to our website, get the book.
Jerry, does it work better, Sociocracy, with an established community versus one that is in process?
Oh, I'd say, and I guess this is not just for Sociocracy, but whatever decision-making process you choose to use, the clearer you are, the earlier in your development process, the better. So if you can, from my perspective, if you can adopt Sociocracy when it's the 5 of you, the founders, going, hey, let's do this, that would be the best thing to do. If you want to use consensus instead of consent process, then be clear. We're going to use consensus, and this is the form of consensus we will use. And then that becomes part of the invitation. You are inviting people, join this co-housing community. We want to build on the north side of this particular city, not the south side. The invitation is, we want to be on the north side. And by the way, we want to be governed this way, so that people know what they're joining, and if you have ambitions greater than just housing, you say that, we want to have a farm. We want to be an educational center, so that the clearer you are about your invitation, the better for all. And governance is one of the key elements of what that invitation should be, from my perspective. It's certainly been a lot easier to support communities that are just starting to adopt Sociocracy than communities like mine that were 18 years old. A lot of people get kind of set in their ways, and change is hard. So the inertia of shifting, when there's a whole bunch of people go, oh, can we do something different? And then there's a bunch of people like, is there something wrong with what we're doing? It seems to be okay. And then there's a few people who are opposed to any kind of change or have particular principles about why they would be opposed to a shift to Sociocracy. And, that can be really tough to go through. Henning, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to put an unsolicited encouragement out there. Jerry, I don't know when you're next doing the leadership training, the SALT. I went through it with Jerry and Ted, and it's just a wonderful learning experience to get to learn sociocracy in an immersive way. Basically, you're working as part of a circle for 6 weeks, and it's just a fabulous way to really get comfortable with sociocracy. So for those that were asking about resources, you know, if you read a book and you get a feel for it, then this is a really good way to practice what you've learned in a supportive environment, and it's a really good way of really solidifying that sociocratic learning.
Thanks for that shout out, Henning. Sociocracy Leadership Training, that's the name of the program. You can read all about it on the Sociocracy for All website. We're doing our 8th cycle of that right now. We're in the middle of it. Cycle 9 starts in a few weeks, but I think there's one more spot left in that program. Cycle 10 will start in January. We're starting to do interviews for that process. To be in the Sociocracy Leadership Training, we do expect you have a little bit of knowledge already about sociocracy, so it's not for the absolute beginners. For the more beginners, we do have another program called the Empowered Learning Circles. It's a 6-session study guide. You gather 4 to 6 people, and you can go through these 6 90-minute sessions that are guided with some handouts and videos. You can do it on your own. You don't need me or Ted, or you can, you know, use us as coaches to that. Ted is putting these, as we talk, is putting the links to these particular programs on the chat if you want to follow those. Yeah, and there's the Sociocracy Leadership Training programs wind up having the participation of people from all over the world. They're limited to 18 people per cohort, and they're not only co-housing. There's always some co-housing people in there, but there are people from software development, from worker co-ops, from social change groups, all sorts of people usually from all over the world, and that makes it also a lot of fun. The Empowered Learning Circles, the study guides, are more often used by intact groups, you know, like co-housing groups. So particularly those who are considering adopting sociocracy, either in the early stage in their development or later, you get a study group to look at that and then talk to the rest of the community. They say, this is wonderful, or whatever their opinion is about it, and share it from there. So I would strongly encourage you all to check out the study group process if you're interested in more. And if you already want to go on to the Sociocracy Leadership Training, that's available. And we are now in the process doing advanced training, which will again start in either January or February. That'll be a much more comprehensive advanced training for people who really want to learn sociocracy. So not just live in co-housing, but take on that aspect of it. Check.
Jerry, it's Al Parrish here from Waterloo Region Co-Housing Project up in Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say in response to John's question, we've been at it, I think, about as long as John's group, just a little over 2 years. And we had started out using consensus as our decision-making process, and we have gone to sociocracy, and we're finding it really effective. And the more we do it, the easier it gets, the more sense it makes, and we feel like we're making really good progress. So just in terms of whether this works for a community in formational stages, I would say yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I have a request for anybody who's still here. If you're part of a co-housing community or other organization that is operating sociocratically, put it in the chat, because we don't even know who you are. You know, I know the groups that I've worked with, but then there's a whole bunch of other groups that may have already been adopting sociocracy without ever letting us know, which is fine, but we'd love to share the news. One of the things that we do in our sociocracy leadership training is to try to do case studies of different groups, including co-housing groups that have adopted sociocracy, so we can hear their stories. Those are also on our website. But you know, I recently worked with Village Hearth Community in North Carolina, worked with Quimper Village in Port Townsend. I think Pat from that group was here for a while. So, you know, we travel and work with different groups. But, you know, Al, I don't know if we've had contact with you directly or not. But, you know, love to keep, yeah. So put it in your, in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, Jerry, we have been in touch. It's been my partner, Wendy Pearl.
Okay, yes, we know Wendy.
Yeah, and again, we're just, we've been really happy with our experience with Sociocracy.
Okay, thanks, Al. Who else wants to say something?
I have a question from Fort Collins, Colorado. This is Karen.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So going back to facilitation and your comments about how it's great to have a lot of the work actually done in the smaller groups, or we call those teams. A lot of the decision making actually happens at that smaller group level. How do you facilitate in the larger group so that those small group decisions are honored, respected, supported, so there's not a disconnect between what the small group is trying to do and what the larger group decides when they hear about it they want to do?
Yeah.
How do you align the work of the smaller groups with the larger community?
It's a good question. So the first thing I'd say is, you know, when we were doing consensus and a lot of our decisions were in the whole group, my joke about this, everybody knew how little we were doing. When we dispersed and gave authority to the small groups, then nobody knew how much we were doing. So the importance of communication is key here. And let me even step back from that. So there, you know, one part is just minutes of meetings. And when we went to Sociocracy, we had, you know, very important transparency, especially if you're going to give authority to smaller groups. So then smaller groups need to report, here's what we're talking about. Here's the decision we just made. All that communication becomes really important. And it can be overwhelming to have 12 different sets of minutes coming at you, you know, every couple of weeks. So we've devised systems of producing minutes all on, you know, like every group having one sentence in a Sunday bulletin. The Tree Cohousing at the Eco Village in Ithaca came up with this, just one pager. Each circle, each team has one line, and they say, this is what we just decided, or this is what we want you to know. You want more detail, click here and get the more minutes of that. So that's one element, is just simply information sharing. The other is that commensurate with dispersing authority to smaller groups comes the responsibility to gather appropriate level feedback. So for small decisions, the group can just do it without really informing anybody other than it's in the minutes. For medium level decisions, you might want to make sure, you know, who's affected by this? Can we do a little survey or talk to a few people, gather enough information so that you feel confident that what you're deciding is going to be in the best interest of the community and that the people most affected have been heard. If you're doing fairly major decisions that really impact the whole community in a significant way, then, you know, then first I might go to the whole community and say, you know, it's our responsibility to make a decision about this, but we want to hear what all the questions that you have about this area. Gather the questions. Go back, wrestle with those questions, maybe come up with a draft policy, and then go back to the community as a whole and say, this is the draft policy that we're thinking of deciding. Tell us what you think. Gather feedback, go back and revise it. And you might even want to go back to the whole community again, depending upon, you know, how controversial or difficult that particular decision is. So that back and forth of gathering feedback, but always being clear that the decision is going to be made in the team or the circle that has the authority about that particular topic. And again, within that context, feedback, meaning whole group feedback from the whole community, surveys, individual conversations with people. The trust is built, trust is earned. So when people who are skeptical and wary and scared of giving power to small groups have the sense that those groups are working honorably, then trust is built. Then you have more and more leeway. If a group, and this happened in one community that I know, they adopted Sociocracy, and then that meant all these different teams had authority to make some things happen, and some of them went ahead and did stuff without getting feedback. And immediately there was an uproar. What? You changed the function of one of the rooms in our common house without even talking to us? And that violated the sense of trust in the whole group. So yes, it was in their domain to make that change, but they didn't act on the responsibility of gathering the feedback, of building the trust about the change they wanted to make, and make sure that they were going to have the support, respect of the community for their process as well as their product. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
All right, do we call it?
Sounds like. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you next week.